Jungkook is torn with jealousy when Taehyung chooses Jimin as his duet partner. What does this choice mean for their relationship? Discover a tale of hidden feelings and sacrifice. What are you going to do, Kook? You can't just stay silent like this. Taehyung's voice broke the silence in the rehearsal room, but Jungkook didn't move. He glanced over briefly, then turned back to stare blankly at the wall. No words left his lips. His breath caught in his chest, and the weight of the moment pressed down on him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The practice had been intense, but there was something more pressing hanging in the air, a choice that left Jungkook frozen. The moment Taehyung made his decision to partner with Jimin for their lead album track, everything shifted. The room seemed to still, as if the world paused for a heartbeat. Jungkook felt a sharp sting in his chest, a coldness that seemed to spread from his heart to every limb. It wasn't that he hadn't expected this. Taehyung and Jimin had always shared an undeniable chemistry. But the feeling of being left out, of not being the one chosen, felt like a betrayal in the deepest parts of his being. A betrayal he wasn't ready to admit. Even to himself, he walked away, leaving the others behind. The rest of BTS continued their rehearsals, oblivious to the internal storm brewing in Jungkook's mind. He retreated to an empty practice room, his thoughts racing. His body felt numb, his mind struggling to process everything. Why Jimin? Why not me? He slumped into a corner of the room, his eyes staring into nothingness. The silence around him was deafening. Meanwhile, in a separate space, Taehyung and Jimin were focused on rehearsing their duet. Taehyung's usual lighthearted energy had returned, his voice full of enthusiasm as he suggested changes to their performance. Jimin, still a bit surprised by Taehyung's choice, couldn't help but feel excited about the opportunity. He admired Taehyung's vocal abilities and had always wanted to collaborate with him on a track that was so important for BTS's success. But deep inside, Jimin couldn't shake the unease he felt. There was something about the way Jungkook had reacted, something off about the way he had distanced himself. Yet, Jimin pushed those thoughts aside, focused instead on making the best out of his moment with Taehyung. He couldn't deny how natural their voices blended, how well they worked together. Back in the practice room, Jungkook's mind was racing with conflicting emotions. He had always been so sure of his connection with Taehyung. They had a bond that went beyond music, something instinctive, something that had always made them perfectly in sync. But now, in this crucial moment, Taehyung had chosen Jimin. The question rang out in his mind over and over. Why? The next morning, when the practice resumed, the atmosphere was tense. Jungkook stood in the corner of the room, watching Taehyung and Jimin interact as they rehearsed. His eyes followed their every movement, their every word. The music played, the sound of their duet filling the space. But for Jungkook, it felt like the music was drowning him. He could hear the perfect harmony between them, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. Jungkook tried to push the emotions down to focus on the task at hand. But the jealousy gnawed at him, a quiet but persistent force inside. He told himself he was being irrational, that his feelings didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But it was impossible to ignore the churning inside him, the overwhelming sense of being replaced. Jungkook, why aren't you joining the practice? Jimin's voice cut through his thoughts, and Jungkook snapped out of his trance. He turned toward Jimin, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm fine, Jungkook replied, his tone flat. He saw the concern in Jimin's eyes, but he couldn't bring himself to explain. Taehyung, who had been observing from a distance, noticed the interaction between the two. There was something off in Jungkook's demeanor, a subtle shift that he couldn't ignore. But Taehyung remained silent, choosing not to confront Jungkook directly. He didn't want to make things worse. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Jungkook. He went through the motions, but his mind was somewhere else, trapped in the web of his own emotions. As he watched Taehyung and Jimin work together, building a connection with every passing moment, Jungkook couldn't help but feel like he was losing something important. Later, when the rehearsal ended, Jungkook found himself standing alone by the window, staring out at the city below. The silence of the night pressed in on him, the weight of everything crashing down. He thought about Taehyung's choice, about the way it had changed everything. But there was more, something deeper, something that went beyond the music, that he spoke to no one but the empty room around him. Sometimes what we think is best for ourselves isn't what we end up choosing, he muttered to himself, the words slipping from his lips like a bitter truth. What did Taehyung's decision really mean? Was it just about music? Or was it something more? Jungkook's heart ached as he realized that this moment, this choice, might mark the beginning of something he wasn't ready to face. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft light across the practice room where the members of BTS were gathered. But despite the serene atmosphere, there was a storm brewing in Jungkook's heart that wouldn't calm. The hours since the previous night's rehearsal felt like an eternity. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Taehyung and Jimin, laughing, joking, harmonizing together like they were the perfect match. But it wasn't just their voices that made him ache. It was the way Taehyung had chosen Jimin over him, as if their bond didn't matter anymore. Jungkook hadn't spoken much since then, and the tension in the air was palpable. The other members could feel it too, the heaviness that lingered in the space whenever Jungkook was around. They didn't know what to say. How could they? The subtle, unspoken distance between Jungkook and Taehyung was enough to make them nervous. But Taehyung, ever the optimist, didn't want to believe things had changed. He continued to approach Jungkook with his usual warmth, but something was different now. Jungkook's responses were more guarded, his smile more forced, his eyes distant. During breakfast that morning, Taehyung tried to break the ice. "Are you okay, Kook?" Taehyung asked casually, poking at his food as he glanced at the younger man. His tone was light, almost playful, but Jungkook could see the subtle concern in his eyes. It didn't matter how many times Taehyung asked. The question felt like a silent reminder that something was wrong. "I'm fine," Jungkook answered curtly, his gaze fixed on his plate. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, and Taehyung swallowed, unsure of how to proceed. He wanted to reach out, to pull Jungkook into a conversation, but he didn't know where to start. He didn't understand why the younger man was pulling away. They'd always been so close, always on the same wavelength. But now, there was a wall between them that Taehyung couldn't break. After breakfast, they gathered for another rehearsal. This time, it was clear that the atmosphere had shifted. The room was quiet, the usual laughter and playful banter replaced with the sound of shuffling feet and scattered instructions from their choreographer. Jimin, eager to rehearse with Taehyung, tried to lighten the mood with a joke. But even his infectious energy couldn't pull Jungkook from his thoughts. Jungkook's mind was consumed with the image of Taehyung and Jimin, their chemistry undeniable as they rehearsed their duet in perfect harmony. It was everything Jungkook had once imagined he would share with Taehyung. Until he was left standing on the sidelines, he couldn't stop watching them. Every glance, every touch, every shared laugh felt like a knife twisting in his gut. The pain was unbearable, but he couldn't leave. He had to be there, to witness the thing that was breaking him as the hours passed. Jungkook's frustration grew. He had never felt so isolated, so unimportant. And he hated it. He hated the way Jimin and Taehyung seemed to fit together effortlessly, the way they moved in sync, their voices blending so perfectly. It was as though they were made for each other. Jungkook tried to drown out the rising jealousy with the sound of his own voice, but no matter how hard he sang, it didn't erase the aching emptiness that had settled deep within him. His songs felt hollow, his notes felt strained. During a break, Jungkook stepped outside for some air, needing to escape from the suffocating tension. The cool breeze hit his face, and for a moment, he felt some semblance of relief. But it didn't last long. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, seeing a message from Taehyung. "Kook, can we talk later?" Jungkook hesitated, his fingers hovering over the screen. He knew what Taehyung wanted to say. He could already hear the words in his head. "What's going on? You've been acting so distant." But Jungkook wasn't ready to confront the truth, not yet. Instead, he shoved the phone back into his pocket and leaned against the railing, staring at the city below. "I'm fine," he muttered to himself, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Inside, the other members were gathering for a quick meeting. Taehyung, concerned by Jungkook's sudden retreat, looked around at the others, but no one seemed to have the answer. "Where's Kook?" Jimin asked, his brow furrowed. "I haven't seen him for a while." "He stepped outside for some fresh air," Jean replied. "But I think he's been off today. Maybe I should go check on him," Taehyung suggested, but the others exchanged glances, unsure of how to proceed. They didn't want to intrude on something that felt so personal, so deep, but Taehyung couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something between him and Jungkook had changed, and he didn't know how to fix it. He could feel the space growing between them, a gap that no one else seemed to notice, but it was there, and it hurt. Jungkook finally returned to the rehearsal room, but the tension didn't lift. The rest of the day passed in a blur of rehearsals, and while the group worked as professionally as always, the rift between Jungkook and Taehyung hung over everything like an invisible cloud. As they gathered to finish for the day, Taehyung finally approached Jungkook. The words that had been trapped in his chest all day finally spilled out. "Kook, what's going on? You've been distant. I don't get it. What did I do?" Jungkook turned to face him, his eyes darker than usual. He wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he offered a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It's nothing," Jungkook said, his voice soft, but his expression betrayed the lie. "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." Taehyung wanted to say more, but the moment felt fragile, like any wrong move would shatter whatever was left between them. He nodded, though his eyes lingered on Jungkook. "Okay, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Jungkook's heart clenched. He wanted to tell him everything. Wanted to scream about the hurt, the jealousy, the fear of losing him, but the words wouldn't come. Not now. Not when Taehyung's smile still held the same warmth, the same kindness it always had. He couldn't risk shattering it. "I know," Jungkook whispered, before turning away. As the day ended, the silence between them remained, thicker than ever. The days passed, but the tension between Jungkook and Taehyung only deepened. Every time Jungkook saw Taehyung and Jimin together, it felt like a physical wound. Their effortless harmony, both musically and emotionally, burned inside him, a reminder that Taehyung had chosen someone else to practice. Jungkook's focus was scattered. He couldn't help but watch the growing bond between Taehyung and Jimin. Despite his efforts to concentrate, the jealousy gnawed at him. He tried to hide it behind a mask of indifference, but it became harder with each passing day. Taehyung's cheerful attempts to engage with him were met with curt replies and forced smiles. One afternoon, during a break, Taehyung tried again, his voice soft with concern. "Kook, why are you avoiding me?" Jungkook's heart tightened. He knew Taehyung was trying, but it only made the distance between them more painful. He could see it in Taehyung's eyes, the confusion, the sadness. But what could he say? That he felt betrayed? That he was scared of losing him? Jungkook just shrugged. "I'm fine, Tae. I'm just tired," he said, keeping his voice calm but distant. The lie hung in the air like smoke, suffocating them both. Meanwhile, Jimin noticed the strain between the two. He had always been close to Taehyung, but he wasn't blind to the shift. There was something between Jungkook and Taehyung that felt broken. Jimin didn't know what had happened, but he could feel the weight of it. One evening, as the group was winding down, Jimin tried to talk to Jungkook. "Hey, Kook, you've been quiet lately. What's going on?" Jungkook forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine. Really?" But Jimin wasn't convinced. He knew Jungkook better than that. He could see the pain in his eyes. It was the same pain he'd seen when the group had faced hardships in the past. But this time, it was different. This time, it was because of him. Jimin wasn't blind to his own role in all this. He had always admired Taehyung, and now that they were rehearsing together, he couldn't deny the thrill of working so closely with him. But he also knew that the intimacy of their bond, the way they clicked, had affected Jungkook deeply. Jungkook pulled away from the conversation, unable to face the reality of his feelings. He was sinking under the weight of his jealousy and confusion, and no one seemed to understand. The distance between him and Taehyung felt insurmountable now, and the more Taehyung and Jimin grew closer, the more it felt like there was no place for him in their world. Days passed, and Jungkook's internal struggle only grew. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The pain, the jealousy, it was tearing him apart. He wanted to speak to Taehyung, to tell him how he felt, but the fear of losing him, of being rejected, kept him silent. Finally, in a quiet moment after a long rehearsal, Taehyung approached him again, his voice laced with concern. "Kook, please. If something's bothering you, talk to me." Jungkook turned away, his hands clenched tightly by his sides. His voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. "I just don't understand, Tae. I thought we were always in sync. But now it feels like you moved on, and I don't know where I fit anymore." Taehyung's face softened. "Kook, I never meant to make you feel that way. You're always going to be my closest friend. But Jimin and I, we're just working together on this song. It's nothing more than that." Jungkook shook his head. "It's not just a song, Tae. It's everything. I feel like I'm losing you." Taehyung reached out, his voice gentle yet firm. "You're not losing me, Kook. You're my brother. But sometimes things change. We grow, we find new connections. But that doesn't mean what we have isn't important. It's always going to be there." Jungkook met his gaze, the words cutting deeper than he expected. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing Taehyung's reassurance, somehow didn't make it any easier. It was the truth he didn't want to face, the truth that Taehyung was growing in new ways, and Jungkook wasn't sure if he could keep up. Taehyung smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll always be a part of this. Don't ever forget that." But Jungkook wasn't sure if he could ever feel the same again. As the weight of his unspoken feelings settled in, he realized that some things, like the bond they once had, couldn't be fixed just by words. The studio was filled with melodies, laughter, and the steady thump of bass through the speakers. But for Jungkook, it all sounded muffled, like he was underwater. Jimin and Taehyung's duet had entered the final stages of production. Their harmonies were sharp, full of emotion, and producers praised them endlessly. The chemistry was undeniable. Fans were already buzzing with anticipation after a leaked teaser clip. #VMin was trending, and the excitement was electric. But in the corner of the room, silent and still, Jungkook watched it all unfold with a hollow ache in his chest. He'd been trying to be professional, trying to be supportive, trying to silence the voice inside him that kept screaming, "It should have been me," that he didn't hate Jimin. How could he? But the more he watched Jimin and Taehyung laugh together, whispering ideas into each other's ears, exchanging subtle looks of shared creativity, the more he felt replaced, invisible. And that was a wound deeper than any argument could leave. That night, Jungkook stayed behind alone in the studio long after the others left. The lights dimmed low. He stood in the vocal booth, headphones over his ears, looping the instrumental track that Taehyung and Jimin were using. His voice trembled as he began to sing over it, singing lines that weren't his, melodies meant for someone else. But he couldn't stop. This was the only way he could feel connected. As if just for a moment he could step into the place he'd been shut out of. Suddenly, the door opened. He stood silently, watching Jungkook pour himself into a song that wasn't his. There was something raw, almost painful, in the way Jungkook sang. Taehyung's heart clenched. "You're not supposed to be here this late," he said gently. Jungkook lowered the mic. "Neither are you." Taehyung stepped inside. The silence between them was thick, charged with everything that had gone unsaid. "Kook, is this really about the duet?" Jungkook didn't answer. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of Taehyung. "You didn't even ask me," he said finally, voice cracking. "You didn't ask what I wanted. You didn't ask how I felt. You just chose." Taehyung's eyes softened. "I didn't think I had to. I thought you'd understand." Jungkook looked away. "I wanted to be the one beside you. Not just for the song. For everything." That was it. The words hung in the air, bare and vulnerable. For a moment, Taehyung said nothing. His silence was a blade. Then, with quiet regret, he stepped closer. "I know," he whispered. "But this wasn't about choosing someone over you. It was about the song. I didn't know it would hurt you like this." Jungkook laughed bitterly. "No, you just didn't think. You thought I'd be okay because I always am. You didn't think it mattered." Taehyung's face twisted with guilt. "That's not true, isn't it?" Jungkook snapped, eyes shining now. "You always say we're connected, that we know each other better than anyone. But how could you not see what this would do to me? A beat of silence passed. I see it now, Taehyung said softly that tea wasn't enough. Jungkook turned away, unable to meet his gaze. I need space, Tae. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. Taehyung nodded, pain written across his face. Okay. As he left the studio, the door closed with a heavy finality. Jungkook stood there alone in the dim light, staring at the mic in front of him. Everything felt different now. The crack between them had become a fracture, and Jungkook was starting to wonder if it would ever fully heal. In the days following their confrontation, Jungkook and Taehyung drifted farther apart. Not with anger, but with a kind of aching politeness that hurt even more. They still stood on the same stage, still moved to the same beat, but something essential had gone quiet between them. Taehyung honored Jungkook's request for space, though it gnawed at him. He watched Jungkook laugh with the others, but the brightness was dimmed, like someone performing joy rather than feeling it. Meanwhile, Jimin, blissfully unaware of the full weight behind the silence, grew more radiant in rehearsals with Taehyung. Their song was nearly complete, and its emotional resonance was undeniable. Yet Taehyung couldn't shake the ghost of Jungkook's words, "I wanted to be the one beside you." Not just for the song, for everything. One night, Taehyung opened his notes app and began writing lyrics. They weren't for the official album. These were words born of guilt, longing, and quiet love. A letter in melody form. He titled it "If You Heard Me." The next day, he left the demo, raw and unfinished, in the studio with a single message sent to Jungkook. "This was for you. I hope it says what I couldn't." When Jungkook listened, alone in that same room where he'd once sung the duet that wasn't his, the lyrics hit like a confession. Taehyung's voice trembled in places it never had before. The words weren't grand or poetic, but they were honest. "You were my harmony long before the chorus came." Tears slipped down Jungkook's face before he even realized he was crying, because he finally understood it had never just been about the duet. It was about all the things they'd never said, too afraid to risk the bond they'd always assumed was unshakable. And now it might be too late. As Jimin and Taehyung recorded the final take for their song, Jungkook stood behind the soundproof glass, watching, listening, heart pounding. He didn't know what choice to make next, to stay silent and let go, or to fight for something he thought he'd already lost. The final days of album production arrived, and so did the silence between Jungkook and Taehyung. Now heavier, quieter, as if both were afraid to strike the wrong chord and shatter what little remained. Jungkook hadn't replied to the song Taehyung left him. Not with words, not with music, but something had shifted. On the night of the album's private listening party, the members gathered under soft lights, surrounded by staff, producers, and close friends. Jimin and Taehyung's duet played to a room of applause. It was a masterpiece, intimate, warm, powerful. Then, unexpectedly, the lights dimmed again. Another track began to... It wasn't on the official set list. Jungkook's voice filled the room, deep and aching, layered over a soft acoustic guitar. "I heard you. I always did. I just didn't know how to answer." Gasps, then silence. Everyone turned toward him, but Jungkook kept his eyes closed, his voice steady. Taehyung froze. It was a response to the song, to the silence, to everything between them. When it ended, Jungkook stepped off the small stage and walked straight toward Taehyung. No cameras, no crowd, just two people, once inseparable, now standing at the edge of something new. "I'm not asking for a duet," Jungkook said softly. "I just want us to find a melody again." Taehyung smiled, the kind that came from deep within. "Then let's start from a chorus." They embraced, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't awkward. It was honest. Some bonds aren't broken, just muted, waiting for the right note to bring them back to life.